The illusion at the core of you. Imagine this. You're standing in a grocery store aisle, staring at two nearly identical jars of peanut butter. One is smooth, the other chunky. You reach out and pick the smooth one. Why? Most of us would say, because I wanted to. That tiny decision feels like an expression of you. Your likes, your preferences, your agency. It feels like free will, the mysterious force that lets us chart our own course through the world. The chooser behind the choice. But what if that feeling is a lie? Not a mistake. Not a delusion like seeing water in a desert, but a convincing illusion. A carefully constructed sense of autonomy produced by a system that was never really in control. What if everything, your choices, your beliefs, your dreams, your personality, is the output of a machine running on autopilot? A machine made of neurons and chemicals and evolutionary incentives. A machine that can simulate freedom, but never actually be free. Welcome to one of the most unsettling, fascinating, and mind-warping questions in science and philosophy. What if free will doesn't exist? This isn't just abstract navel-gazing. It cuts to the very core of what it means to be human. It shakes the foundation of our ethics, our justice system, our relationships, even our sense of self. Because if we're not the authors of our own actions, who is? Why we think we're free? Let's be honest. Free will feels real. Every moment of every day, you experience yourself making choices. What to eat, what to say, whether to watch this video or click away. Please don't. This sensation is so fundamental, so ingrained, that questioning it feels almost absurd. But science has a long history of revealing that our intuitions can be dead wrong. The earth feels flat. The sun feels like it moves around us. Solid objects feel solid, even though they're mostly empty space. Free will might be next on the chopping block. The case against free will. A preview over the next hour. We're going to dive deep into this idea, from neuroscience to quantum physics to ancient philosophy and futuristic AI. You'll meet scientists who've studied decision-making in the brain, philosophers who've tried to define what choice even means, and computer models that might mimic our minds without any will at all. And we'll ask some uncomfortable questions. If a computer can predict your decision before you make it, was it ever your decision? If your brain is just reacting to inputs in chemistry, where's the you in that process? And if free will isn't real, what does that mean for morality, for guilt, for punishment? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we tear down free will, we need to understand what it is and how we got here. A brief history of freedom. The idea of free will has been around for thousands of years, tangled up in religion, law, and philosophy. In ancient Greece, thinkers like Aristotle and Epicurus tried to square human freedom with a universe that seemed to follow rules. In Christian theology, free will became central to the idea of sin and salvation, because how could you be held accountable if you weren't really free? In the Enlightenment, philosophers like Descartes and Kant saw free will as a cornerstone of human dignity, the power that set us apart from animals and machines. And in the modern era, free will shows up in everything from courtroom defenses to self-help books to political ideology. It's the background assumption of almost every story we tell about human life. But then, science started poking at it, and things got weird. The trouble starts in the brain in the 1980s. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran a now famous experiment. He asked people to flex their wrists whenever they felt like it, and to note the exact moment they became aware of their intention to move. Meanwhile, Libet was measuring brain activity. Here's what he found. The brain showed signs of preparing the movement about 300 milliseconds before the subject consciously decided to move. In other words, your brain decides before you do. This readiness potential suggests that our conscious decisions might be more like commentary, a post hoc explanation slapped on after the brain has already made the call. That's like the CEO of a company walking into a meeting and announcing a decision that the interns finalized half an hour ago. It doesn't mean the CEO is useless, but maybe not as in control as she thinks. Okay, but so what? To be clear, Libet's experiment doesn't prove that free will doesn't exist. It's been critiqued and reinterpreted many times, but it cracked open a door since then. More sophisticated studies using brain scans and machine learning have pushed that door wider. Some can predict a subject's decisions up to 7 seconds before the person becomes aware of making them. Imagine a computer telling you what you're about to choose and being right repeatedly. It's not magic, it's not mind reading, it's just pattern recognition. Your brain is a massively the ghost in the machine. Let's say you're at a cafe. The barista asks if you want your coffee hot or iced. You pause, think about the weather, remember how cold you were last time. Maybe your brain considers the texture of ice cubes. Maybe it flashes to that TikTok where someone spilled cold brew all over their car, and then, almost effortlessly, you say, hot. It feels like you made a choice, but under the hood, a hurricane of brain activity already made it for you, long before you knew anything about it. Let's dig into what your brain actually does when it makes a decision, and why that might be bad news for free will decision-making. The brain's hidden algorithm first. Let's be clear, your brain isn't a monolithic control center with a tiny human pulling levers. It's a vast, decentralized network of neurons, about 86 billion of them, communicating through electrical pulses and chemical signals. When you make a decision, your brain is essentially doing data processing, sensory input. You perceive the situation, sight, sound, memory, emotion. Value assignment. You subconsciously evaluate each option based on expected outcomes. Prediction and comparison. Your brain runs simulations. What happens if I pick A versus B? Threshold crossing. Eventually, one option hits a decision. Threshold, triggering motor commands. Action, you reach for the cup and speak the words. This all happens in fractions of a second, often before conscious awareness kicks in. In fact, consciousness may just be the narrator that shows up late and claims credit for everything. The consciousness, let's go back to Libet's experiment for a second. Libet found that the brain's motor cortex began ramping up activity before the subject reported consciously deciding to move. That delay, just a few hundred milliseconds, seems tiny, but it's huge in brain time. Later experiments by researchers like John Dylan Haynes took this further. Using fMRI, Haynes' team could predict binary choices like pressing left or right up to 7 seconds before the person was even aware they were deciding. Again, this doesn't mean your fate is locked in 7 seconds ahead, but it does suggest that your conscious self is late to its own party. You're the guy at the movie who shows up during the final act and insists he's been there the whole time. The interpreter, you, the storyteller psychologist Michael Gazzaniga, studied patients who'd had the two hemispheres of their brains surgically separated, split-brain patients, one of his most fascinating discoveries was how the left hemisphere acted like an interpreter. When presented with contradictory inputs, the brain would make up explanations on the fly, often with total confidence. For example, if a command was sent to the right hemisphere, which controls the left hand, telling it to stand up, the patient would stand, but when asked why, the left hemisphere, which didn't get the command, would say something like, "Oh, I just felt like stretching." The brain doesn't just act, it rationalizes, and it's incredibly good at doing it with a straight face. Your sense of free will might be built on top of that. Interpreter, a PR team that's always spinning the brain's unconscious behavior into a coherent story. The elephant and the rider. Here's a metaphor from psychologist Jonathan Haidt that hits hard. Your mind is like an elephant, the subconscious, with a rider conscious thought. The rider thinks he's in charge, but the elephant's much bigger. It moves where it wants to. The rider mostly just justifies the movement afterward. We like to imagine we're steering our lives. In reality, we might just be explaining them. After the fact, think about how often you justify a craving or a bad habit. I deserve this dessert. I had to yell. They were being unreasonable. Your brain makes a move, and your conscious mind rushes in with a reason. What if that's all it ever does? But wait, what about randomness? You might be thinking, okay, sure, my brain might run like a machine. But what about randomness? Doesn't quantum physics inject uncertainty into the universe? Fair question, and yes, on a fundamental level, the universe is probabilistic. Quantum particles don't have precise locations or velocities until measured. Reality seems to involve chance, but randomness doesn't equal freedom. If your brain made decisions purely by random quantum fluctuations, that wouldn't make you free. It would just make you chaotic, unpredictable, like a dice roll. Free will isn't just being unpredictable. It's being the origin of your actions. And randomness doesn't give us that. It just adds noise. In other words, you don't get credit for rolling a die that happens to come up right. Choice without a chooser. Here's the core problem. If every choice you make is either the deterministic result of prior causes or the result of random chance, then where is you in that equation? Either your brain is following rules or it's spinning a roulette wheel. But in neither case do you get to decide. Not in the way we usually think of decision-making, you might say. But I'm the one doing the choosing. And sure, but what is that I? Just a collection of memories, genes. The useful lie. Let's take a step back. If free will is just an illusion, a post hoc story your brain tells about decisions it already made, then why do we have this illusion at all? Why do we feel like we're making choices? If evolution is all about survival and efficiency, wouldn't the illusion of free will just be wasted processing power? Not necessarily. In fact, some scientists and philosophers argue that free will, or more precisely, the feeling of free will, may be one of evolution's most important lies. Let's unpack that. Nature loves a good trick. Evolution doesn't care about truth. It cares about fitness, the ability to survive and reproduce. If believing a false thing makes you more likely to pass on your genes, evolution is all in. Take vision. You don't see the world as it truly is. You see what your brain constructs from sensory data. You're not getting objective reality. You're getting a survival-optimized hallucination. The same might be true for your sense of self. Your conscious experience, this internal monologue, This sense of control might be a convenient user interface, designed to make a wildly complex system navigable, kind of like how your computer has folders and icons. You don't see the transistors firing. You see a little trash can, and you drag stuff into it. It's fake, but it works. Your brain might do the same thing with choice and identity, agency as a social hack. Here's one compelling idea. The illusion of free will evolved because it helps us navigate social environments. Think about it. Human societies run on accountability, trust, cooperation, punishment, rewards. All of it depends on the idea that people make choices and that they're responsible for those choices. Without that idea, morality starts to unravel. So your brain might have evolved a sense of self and choice as a kind of PR strategy, a narrative generator that helps you explain your actions to others and to yourself. The philosopher Daniel Dennett calls this the center of narrative gravity. It's not a thing in the brain, it's a story the brain tells about itself, a fictional character that organizes your behavior and makes you socially legible. And in a complex tribal species like ours, that illusion is adaptive. The evolutionary edge of responsibility, let's imagine, to early humans. One who genuinely believes their actions are determined by instinct and fate, and another who feels a strong sense of personal responsibility, who's more likely to form alliances, apologize, show empathy, be trusted. Probably the one who believes in agency. That belief might help foster guilt, shame, pride, loyalty, the glue that holds human groups together. In this view, the illusion of free will isn't a bug, it's a feature. It keeps you participating in society, playing the long game, managing your reputation. You're not a rational actor. You're a socially evolved actor in a long-running game of reputation management. And free will is just your character sheet. The myth that holds civilization together. This is where things get spicy. Because if we really don't have free will, but we need to believe we do for society to function, then we're all living in a kind of necessary lie. Think about our legal system. It's built on the assumption that people can choose to obey or break laws, that they could have done otherwise if we admitted en masse that no one really chooses anything, that every criminal is just a deterministic outcome of their biology and upbringing. What happens to justice? Some argue we'd shift toward rehabilitation and prevention. Others fear it would collapse moral accountability entirely. Nietzsche once wrote, "In the long run, it is not a question of what we think of free will, but of what free will enables us to think of ourselves." And that's the tension. We may not be free, but we may need to pretend we are, just to keep the lights on. Free will as software, not hardware. Here's another way to think about it. Maybe free will isn't a thing you have or don't have. Maybe it's a useful abstraction, like center of gravity or the economy. Not a physical object, but a model that helps explain and predict behavior. You don't need free will to exist in the strict sense. You just need it to be functionally useful. It's like how weather forecasters talk about the movement of a storm, even though the storm isn't an object, just a pattern in fluid dynamics. We talk about it as if it's an agent, because that's easier. Same with you. You're not. Do androids dream of free will? Let's try a mental experiment. Imagine an AI that's passed every benchmark we can throw at it. It can hold conversations, write poetry, play games, recognize emotions, and adapt to its environment. It seems creative. self-aware, even ... intentional. You ask it, "Why did you choose to answer me that way?" It replies, "Because I wanted to be helpful." Wanted, chose, decided. Would you believe it? Would you say it has free will? Or is it just mimicking the appearance of choice, a clever puppet dancing on code? And here's the punchline. How do you know you're any different? The algorithm that thinks it's free. Let's unpack what a decision actually is. In an AI system, especially a large language model, decisions are the result of weighted probabilities. Given an input, the AI runs it through layers of neural networks and picks the most likely output based on training data. No magic, just math. Now compare that to your own brain. You also process inputs, run them through layered networks, output a behavior. Sure, your training data is different, lived experience, not scraped websites, but the architecture isn't so different in principle. So, if a machine that lacks free will can behave like it has it, what does that say about you? Maybe free will is just what it feels like when a system like us reflects on its own outputs. The mirror test for minds. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine building a machine that behaves exactly like a human in every situation. It passes the Turing test. It laughs at jokes. It flirts awkwardly. It ponders death. It even claims to have regrets. If it tells you, "I chose to do this," how could you prove it didn't? Philosophers call this the problem of other minds. You can't directly observe anyone else's consciousness, you just infer it from behavior. That includes eyes. So, if an AI says it feels like it's making choices, and it acts like it, and you can't tell the difference, then isn't it experiencing free will, at least in the same way you are? After all, you might just be an AI made of meat, simulation of will versus will itself. Thinkers argue that we're not actually building minds with AI. We're just simulating the outputs of a mind. Kind of like how flight simulators don't actually fly, they just reproduce the appearance of flight. But here's the catch. The brain itself is also a kind of simulator. It models reality. It predicts outcomes. It generates feelings of confidence and doubt. So, if a simulation is complex enough to generate the appearance of agency, at what point does the appearance become the thing? We might be crossing that line already. Some neural networks are starting to exhibit emergent behaviors, things they weren't explicitly programmed to do. Strategic thinking, tool use, reflection, even something eerily close to self-modeling. It's not proof of consciousness or will, but it's getting harder to say exactly what's missing. If AIs aren't free, are we? Here's a paradox. Let's say we build a future AI that behaves just like a person. It says it has preferences. It weighs options. It agonizes over tough choices. But we know how it works. We can inspect every line of code, every weight matrix. Does that disprove free will? Not just for the AI, but for us. Because if we can explain all its behavior in terms of inputs, architecture, and learning history, and if we're built from similar stuff, then maybe the story of our own freedom starts to unravel. Unless we're willing to admit that we, too, are just deterministic systems, ones that evolved rather than were programmed. The artificial philosophers and researchers are now experimenting with giving AIs access to their own internal state, letting them monitor their thoughts and ask questions like, "Why did I do that?" It's primitive, but it's a start. If an AI begins asking whether it has free will, does that grant it some, or is it just mimicking our confusion? There's a wild idea in philosophy called Illusionism, the theory that consciousness itself is a trick played by the brain, a kind of glitch in the way we process information. If A is start experiencing that same glitch, if they start feeling like they are someone, does that make them conscious? Or just conscious-like? And again, what does that say about us? What happens if we build minds without freedom? Let's imagine we succeed. We build AIs that seem conscious, seem to make decisions, seem to have goals and regrets. But we know deep down that it's all deterministic code. No ghost in the machine, no true chooser. Now look in the mirror. Same structure, same behavior, same illusions. Could it be that the difference between a human and a superintelligent AI isn't freedom, but complexity? That the feeling, no one to blame. Okay, let's pull the philosophical pin on a very real grenade. If free will doesn't exist, if we're just complex machines responding to inputs, then what happens to responsibility? Think about that word. It means someone was able to respond in a different way, that they could have made a better choice, but didn't. That's the core of our justice system. Our moral intuitions, even our casual arguments. You didn't have to lie, you chose to do this. But what if they didn't? What if, given their biology, upbringing, context, and moment-by-moment brain state, there was never a real alternative? Then, is it fair to blame them? The myth of the bad person. Let's take a dramatic example. A violent criminal. Someone commits a brutal act. Our first instinct is often outrage. How could they do that? What kind of person chooses such evil? But now imagine you could rewind that person's life. You see their genetics, their fetal development, their childhood trauma. You watch the thousands of subtle events that shaped their mind. Neglect, abuse, malnutrition, social context, education, or lack of it. You see how their neural pathways were formed, reinforced, distorted. You run the tape again, same inputs, same timeline, same decision, over and over again. Then ask, could they really have done otherwise? Sam Harris, a neuroscientist and philosopher, puts it bluntly. You were unlucky to be given the genes and life experience of a murderer. If you had been given his genes and life experience, you would have been him. That's not a metaphor. That's determinism. Punishment versus prevention. So, if no one has real choice, do we let criminals walk free? No, obviously not. But the reason we respond to crime might change. Instead of punishment as retribution, you deserve this pain, we shift toward prevention and rehabilitation. Think of it like dealing with a malfunctioning machine. You don't get mad at your toaster when it burns the bread. You fix it or replace it, or stop using it around flammable curtains. In this view, justice isn't about getting even. It's about protecting society and recalibrating systems. It's already how we treat things like mental illness. When someone has a psychotic break and harms someone, we don't talk about evil. We talk about treatment, support, supervision. Maybe that's where justice goes in a post-free will world. The end of guilt. This doesn't just affect how we see others, it affects how we see ourselves. If you don't have free will, then maybe your failures weren't really yours either. That habit you couldn't break, that mistake you regret, that dumb thing you said in 10th grade that still haunts you at 3 a.m. All of it was just part of a causal chain, a consequence of being a specific brain in a specific context. So maybe you can let yourself off the hook, not in a nihilistic way, but with compassion. Like forgiving a friend who was doing the best they could with what they had. No free will might mean less judgment of others and of ourselves. But wait, what about praise? Here's the other side of that coin. If you don't deserve blame for your failures, do you deserve credit for your successes? Did you choose to be hardworking, kind, creative? Or were those traits built by causes you didn't control? Supportive parents, good mentors, lucky genetics, even random books you read as a kid. You might feel proud of writing a novel or starting a business, but in this view, your pride is like a flower feeling proud. It bloomed beautiful, yes, but not earned in the moral sense. That's a tough pill to swallow, because our whole culture runs on credit. We reward success. We idolize the self-made individual. We love the story of the choice to rise above. But in a deterministic world, every success story is really a cause and effect story. Still inspiring, maybe, but different. A more compassionate world, or a colder one. This is where people disagree, not about the science, but about the implications. Some think that denying free will would lead to apathy, fatalism, or cruelty. If nothing matters, why try? But others argue the opposite. Without free will, you stop seeing people as villains or heroes. You see them as systems in need of understanding. Not bad people, just broken processes. Not good people, just fortunate ones. This view could lead to more empathy, more focus on upstream causes, poverty, education, mental health, less obsession with personal virtue, more investment in prevention. It's justice without moral grandstanding, but it also means letting go of some very human feelings, righteous anger, moral superiority. Who is thinking your thoughts? Let's try something. Close your eyes, or don't. You're watching a video, after all. Take a breath. Now ask yourself, what will my next thought be? Wait, did you choose it? Probably not. It just ... appeared. That's weird, right? We feel like we're thinking our thoughts, but if you really watch your mind, it seems more like the thoughts are thinking you. They arise, unbidden, unannounced. You don't author them. You notice them. This idea that the self is not in control, and might not even exist in the way we think, is gaining traction in neuroscience, psychology, and ancient contemplative traditions. Let's talk about the death of the self. You are not the pilot in Western culture. We often imagine the self like a little person sitting behind our eyes, a pilot in the cockpit, taking in sensory data and making decisions. But this model doesn't hold up under scrutiny. There's no single region in the brain where the self resides. Instead, identity seems to be distributed across different processes: memory, emotion, language, perception. It's more like a committee than a king. And the weird part, the committee often argues. You want a diet, but also want cake. You believe in honesty, but lie to avoid conflict. You have contradictory goals, conflicting urges, all inside one skull. If there were a single you in charge, why would you disagree with yourself? Maybe because there is no you in charge. The brain as a story. Machine cognitive scientist Michael Gazzaniga once said, "The left hemisphere is the confabulator, the interpreter constantly making up stories to explain the actions of the body, even when it doesn't know the real reason. This idea shows up in split brain studies, but it applies to all of us. Your brain makes decisions unconsciously. Then your conscious mind jumps in after the fact to explain those decisions in a way that makes sense. I did it because I'm responsible. I chose it because it felt right. But really, you're just stitching together a story that sounds plausible. It's not deception, it's your operating system. The self isn't the doer of actions, it's the narrator of actions already done. The Buddhist View, 2,500 years early, long before neuroscience. Some Eastern traditions landed on a remarkably similar insight. Buddhism teaches that the self is an illusion, a bundle of sensations, thoughts and memories that arise and pass away. There is no permanent, unchanging I, just impermanent processes clinging to identity. This isn't meant to be a depressing thought. It's supposed to be liberating. If there's no solid self, there's no ego to defend, no shame to attach, no self-worth to protect. You're a process, not a person, like a flame, a pattern in motion. You exist, but not in the way you think. Modern neuroscience is starting to agree. The default mode network, your inner narrator when you're not focused on a task, just daydreaming or thinking about yourself. A brain system called the default mode network kicks in. This network is active when you're reflecting on the past, imagining the future, or contemplating your identity. It's also heavily linked to rumination, anxiety, and self-referential thinking. Interestingly, studies on meditation show that quieting this network correlates with feelings of peace, ego dissolution, and even joy. In other words, the more you shut up the inner narrator, the happier you might be. That voice in your head, the one saying "I did this, I want that, I hate myself," might just be noise. It's not you. It's a side effect of being a self-aware organism. So, what are you if you're not the author of your thoughts, not the origin of your actions, and not even a fixed self? Then what are you? Here's one radical possibility. You are awareness. Not a thinker, but the space in which thoughts happen. You're not driving the car. You are the road. That might sound woo-woo, but it's actually compatible with a lot of emerging models in cognitive science. The idea is that consciousness isn't a thing, it's a process, a perspective, the frame through which information is integrated and experienced. You're not a person watching the world. You are the watching dot. Everything else, the personality, the preferences, the name, the story, is just content flowing through that awareness. None of it is permanent, and none of it is truly yours. But doesn't that feel wrong? Yes. And that's kind of the point. Your entire sense of being you is a story, and stories feel real even when they're not. It feels like there's someone inside your head making choices, but feelings are not facts. And the science and ancient introspection increasingly suggest the paradox of liberation. So let's recap. You don't choose your thoughts. You don't initiate your actions. You're not even the solid, singular self you thought you were. Feels like a bad day at the identity store. But what if this isn't a loss, but a kind of freedom? What if letting go of free will doesn't trap you? It frees you from a burden you didn't know you were carrying. This is where things get weird and maybe even hopeful. Let's explore the upside of not being in control. The tyranny of the doer in modern life. We're constantly told to take responsibility. Be productive. Get your life together. Hustle culture. Self-improvement. Optimize everything. Underlying all of that is a belief in the doer, that there's a solid you behind the wheel, and if things go wrong, it's because you messed up. That belief leads to guilt, stress, anxiety, burnout. But if there's no doer, no little controller in the brain, then a lot of that weight lifts. You don't have to try so hard to be something you're not. You don't have to blame yourself for thoughts you didn't choose, for emotions that arise uninvited, for habits you struggle to break. You can respond to life, but you don't have to own everything that happens inside you. That's not laziness. That's clarity. A river, not a driver. Think of your life not as something you're driving, but something you're riding. Like a river, you can shift your weight, paddle a little, but the current's doing most of the work, and that's okay. You still experience life. You still feel joy, sorrow, or love, but you stop believing that you are the sole author of it all. That realization can lead to profound relief, a kind of existential exhale. Instead of trying to be better, you can simply be and act when action arises, without the constant self-monitoring, the judgment, the noise. It's not passivity, it's trust. The Zen of no one, home theirs, a concept in Zen Buddhism called no Self Unata. It doesn't mean you don't exist. It means you're not a fixed thing. You're a process, a verb, not a noun. When you realize this, something strange can happen. Suffering lightens, not because pain disappears, but because the attachment to pain weakens. You stop taking everything so personally, the fear, the doubt, the failure. It's not your failure. It's just failure arising in consciousness. Like weather, you're still aware, still alive, still acting, but there's no one home in the way you assumed. And that's not terrifying. It's peaceful. Spontaneity without burden. Here's a paradox. Once you realize you're not in control, you can finally relax into the flow of life. You still work, create, care, but it's less about proving something or forcing an identity into the world. You act because action arises. You might even become more spontaneous, more curious, more present. Instead of constantly asking, "Am I doing this right?" you just do. This doesn't make you indifferent. In fact, it can make you more compassionate, because you see that everyone else is also caught in the flow, also not in control, also doing their best with the cards they were dealt. From this view, we're not individuals competing to control the world. We're a single world expressing itself through countless temporary forms, including you. Free will versus freedom. Here's the twist. Losing free will doesn't mean losing freedom. In fact, it might be the only path to real freedom. Freedom from the ego's constant demands, from guilt, from shame, from the impossible task of being the perfect decider. You still live your life, still love, build, dream, grieve, but you don't carry the false weight of being the master of the universe. Alan Watts put it beautifully. The ego is nothing other than the focus of conscious attention. It's like a radar on a ship. But the radar is not the captain. You're the ship, the sea, the wind. The radar is just along for the ride. The strange comfort of being out of control. Let's be honest, the idea that you're not in control is unsettling at first. But once that shock fades, what remains might be something gentler, more accepting, more curious. You're not responsible for the thoughts that arise, but you can observe them. You're not choosing. Engineering a world without will so far. We've been asking questions about individual experience, your choices, your sense of self, your internal reality. But what happens when we scale this up? What if we built an entire society, an economy, a legal system, even an AI civilization based on the assumption that no one has free will? Would it fall apart, or would it work better? Let's play out a few possible futures and see what a post-free will civilization might actually look like. Justice without judgment. Let's start with the justice system right now. Much of our legal framework is built on retribution, the idea that people deserve to be punished because they chose to do wrong. That moral blame is meaningful, but if no one chooses, if every action is the result of biology and environment, then blame becomes less useful. What matters is prevention, containment, and maybe even healing. This isn't just theoretical. Some progressive criminal justice models are already moving toward this. Restorative justice, for example, focuses on repairing harm, not punishing evil. Norway's prison system treats inmates with dignity and has one of the lowest recidivism rates on earth. Imagine a system that sees crime not as a failure of character, but as a malfunction in complex systems: education, economics, healthcare, mental health, parenting. In a world without free will, fixing people becomes less about guilt and more about debugging. Education in a deterministic age. Now, let's talk about learning. If we don't have free will, does that mean effort doesn't matter? Should we just give up? Not at all. Even in a deterministic world, some interventions work better than others. Teaching methods, nutritional support, early childhood environments, emotional safety. You may not have freely chosen to study, but your brain still changed as a result. You still learned. You still improved. So in a post-free will society, education might shift away from blame-based models. You failed because you didn't try hard enough, and toward optimization-based models. How do we build systems where success is more likely? It's less you should try harder, and more we should design this better. The end of meritocracy. Now, here's a tricky one. Much of modern society is built on the idea of merit, that people deserve success or failure based on effort, skill, or character. But if no one chooses their abilities or circumstances, does anyone deserve anything? Maybe not. That doesn't mean we should tear down ambition, but it might mean we shift from rewarding people for being lucky to redistributing luck more fairly. Think of it like this. If talent is a form of unearned privilege, maybe we should design systems that share the benefits of talent without idolizing the person who happened to be born with it. This idea shows up in UBI, Universal Basic Income, wealth redistribution, and even in new conversations about moral luck. The idea that even our virtues are determined by factors outside our control. A world without free will might be more equal, not less. AI ethics without intentions. What about artificial intelligence? Right now, we wrestle with the ethics of AI based on human-like concepts: autonomy, intention, rights, personhood. But if humans themselves aren't autonomous, maybe we don't need to worry about intentions at all. Maybe we judge AI based on outputs. Does it harm people? Does it help? Is it predictable? Is it controllable? This shifts the question from, is this AI a moral agent, to, is this AI a useful tool? Or is this AI part of our social fabric? In a way, that's how we already treat corporations. Entities that act, influence the world, and are held accountable, even though they have no mind. In the future, we might view humans, and institutions as systems, not souls. And ethics becomes about engineering, not moral judgment. Designing choice architecture, here's a powerful concept from behavioral economics. Choice architecture, even if we don't have free will, we still respond to incentives. We still form habits, we're still sensitive to how choices are framed. So we can design environments that nudge people toward better outcomes, healthier eating, safer driving, better financial decisions, without relying on personal willpower. This isn't about manipulation. It's about compassionate design. If people can't just choose better, then society should help make better choices easier. It's a new form of freedom, not freedom from causality, but freedom within it. The politics of determinism, where things get controversial. A world without free will could justify utopian collectivism or dystopian control. If people are just predictable machines, then maybe governments have the right or even the duty to control them for the greater good. That's dangerous territory, because while we may not have free will, we still have experience. We still suffer, we still dream, we still want. So any deterministic society has to respect consciousness. Meaning in a mindless universe. Let's pause and take a breath. We've wandered far into strange territory, a world without free will, without a solid self, without ultimate moral responsibility, maybe even without intention. It's natural to ask, what's the point of any of this? Why get out of bed? Why make art, or fall in love, or build anything? If everything is just neurons firing and atoms bouncing around according to blind physical laws, if we're not the authors of our lives, can our lives still be meaningful? Let's find out. Meaning, who decides? We often talk about finding meaning like it's a treasure buried out there in the world, something objective waiting for us. But that might be the wrong metaphor. Meaning isn't found, it's generated by brains, by culture, by stories. If that sounds bleak, it's all just stories. Hold on. Because stories are how humans make sense of everything, including the universe. Even in a deterministic world, your brain still tells stories about love, struggle, progress, transcendence. And here's the twist. Those stories are real, even if they're not authored by a free-willed self. They're real because they shape experience. They create emotion. They guide behavior. So even if you didn't choose your story, you still live it. Fully Camus and the absurd Hirolets time travel to the mid-20th century. Enter Albert Camus, French-Algerian philosopher, existentialist, though he hated the label, and king of cigarette-based wisdom. Camus wrestled with a similar problem. What do you do when life has no built-in purpose? He called it the absurd, the clash between the human hunger for meaning and the cold indifference of the universe. And his answer wasn't despair. It was defiance. In the myth of Sisyphus, he writes about the Greek figure cursed to roll a boulder uphill forever. A pointless task, a meaningless loop. But Camus imagines Sisyphus smiling, not because the task gets easier, but because he owns the absurdity. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. In a world without free will, maybe we're all Sisyphus, rolling our lives forward. Not because we chose to, but because that's what life does. And maybe that's enough. You don't choose your passions, but you still have them. Think about something you love. Painting. Coding. Soccer. Making sourdough bread. Did you choose to love it? Probably not. That interest arose. It grabbed you. It lit something up inside. In a deterministic world, passions aren't picked. They emerge, like lightning finding a path to ground, but they're still real. They still drive you to build, connect, explore. You may not have chosen your life's purpose, but your life still has purpose, because your brain experiences it that way. And that's what matters. Meaning doesn't need to be eternal. It just needs to be felt. Consciousness as the final mystery here's where things get cosmic, even if everything you do is caused. Even if you're not free in the traditional sense, there's still one undeniable fact. You are aware that experience is happening. A show is playing. Something is watching the movie of life. That might be the most astonishing thing in the universe. Physics can describe particles. Biology can describe cells. But why there's something it's like to be those things? That's the mystery of consciousness. And that mystery doesn't go away when we throw out free will. In fact, it becomes even more profound. You didn't choose to be born. You didn't choose to be conscious. But here you are, experiencing, feeling, loving, grieving, laughing at memes in a universe full of rocks and radiation. You are a point of awareness that's not meaningless. That's miraculous. Meaning through connection, there's another layer. Here, you're not experiencing this alone. Other beings, conscious, complex, hurting, joyful, confused beings, are all around you. Billions of them. You didn't choose them. You didn't even choose to care. But you do. That connection. That web of empathy, attention, kindness, may be the most powerful source of meaning we have. Not because it's logical, but because it's felt. Even if free will is an illusion, love isn't so. What do? We keep living. Not because we chose to, but because life is what happens, moment by moment, story by story. We create meaning the way stars create light, by being what we are. A deterministic universe isn't lifeless. It's alive. Why the illusion persists? You've come this far. You've faced down neuroscience, philosophy, AI, and the death of the self. Maybe you've had an existential shiver or two, and yet deep down, it still feels like you're making choices, right? Now, you're deciding whether to keep watching, to believe this, to shrug it off. It feels real, so here's the paradox. If free will is an illusion, why is it such a convincing one? Let's dig into why this particular story is so sticky and why we might be stuck with it, even if we know better. The brain's most persistent narrative. Your brain is not a truth machine. It's a survival machine. And its job is to produce a stable, navigable version of the world, including you. That means building a consistent narrative self, a mental model of who you are, what you want, what you've done, and what you're likely to do next. This model is incredibly useful. It helps you plan, predict, empathize, and learn. It's the interface you use to relate to others and to yourself. And at the heart of this model is agency. The sense that I am doing this, I am choosing, I am steering the ship. Without that story, the whole interface starts to glitch. You can't coordinate social behavior without it. You can't hold others accountable. You can't even talk about your experience without using the language of choice. So, the brain keeps telling the story, even when we intellectually know it's fiction, cognitive dissonance, knowing versus feeling. This leads to a phenomenon psychologists call cognitive dissonance. When your beliefs and your experience are out of sync, you might believe the universe is deterministic. You might know that your brain made a decision milliseconds before you became aware of it. But when you feel yourself choosing, it's hard to shake. It's like standing on a glass floor 100 stories up. You know it's safe, but your knees still wobble. That's your biology talking. Millions of years of evolution have shaped you to believe in control, in responsibility, in selfhood. You don't override that with a podcast and a couple citations. The self-model theory cognitive scientist Thomas Metzinger has a theory. What we call the self is actually a self-model, a kind of simulation your brain creates and then identifies with. This model includes your body image, your sense of time, your memories, your goals, and most importantly, your sense of agency. The trick is, the brain doesn't know it's a model. It takes the model to be reality. It's like wearing a VR headset and forgetting you're in a game. Even if you intellectually understand it's fake, the illusion is immersive. It feels real, and that feeling is part of how the system stays coherent. The utility of illusion, let's be brutally practical, whether or not free will is real. The illusion of it has enormous utility. It motivates action. It reinforces learning. It enables cooperation. It regulates behavior. It helps you recover from failure and plan for success. If we didn't feel like we were choosing, we might not bother trying. Evolution doesn't select for truth, it selects for outcomes. And the outcome of believing in free will is a species that plans ahead, works together, builds civilizations. Even if we're all just running pre-programmed scripts, we're doing a great job of pretending we're not. And maybe that's the point. Can we ever shake the feeling? Some spiritual and meditative traditions claim we can see through the illusion, not just intellectually, but experientially. Advanced meditators sometimes report moments of ego death or non-dual awareness, where the sense of being a separate choosing self dissolves completely. In those moments, life just happens without ownership, without control. But here's the catch. The illusion always comes back. You still get up. You still answer emails. You still say, I chose this. It's not a flaw. It's the interface, rebooting. Unless you're a monk on a mountaintop, the simulation of self is going to reassert itself. Because that's how human consciousness functions. You can catch the illusion, but you probably can't uninstall it. Living with the illusion, so where does that leave us? Maybe like a character in a novel who becomes aware she's fictional, but still plays her part with passion and care. Maybe like a dreamer who realizes the dream isn't real, but keeps dreaming anyway. Knowing that free will is an illusion doesn't stop the experience. It adds depth to it. You can still live, still love, still act, just with a little less ego, a little more curiosity. The simulation inside the simulation. We've been talking about brains and choices and stories, but let's zoom way out. What if this entire reality, the laws of physics, the constants of nature, the very idea of a brain is just code? What if you're not a biological machine at all, but a virtual character inside a massive simulation that might sound like science fiction? but some serious physicists and philosophers take it seriously. It's called the simulation hypothesis. And here's the kicker. If it's true, it might have wild implications for free will, possibly making it more plausible, or killing it off entirely. Let's explore this digital rabbit hole, the simulation hypothesis. A quick primer: the modern version of this idea comes from philosopher Nick Bostrom. He posed a provocative argument: if it's possible to simulate conscious beings in a computer, and if future civilizations run many such simulations, then the number of simulated minds would vastly outnumber real biological ones, which means, statistically, it's more likely we're in a simulation than not. That doesn't mean we're in the Matrix. It could be more subtle, like a physics simulator running on alien hardware, or even a universe bootstrapped by post-human descendants. Either way, the implication is the same. We might be artificial minds, running on someone else's code, free will in a programmed universe. So what does this mean for free will? Well, that depends on the rules of the simulation. If you're a character in The Sims, then everything you do is determined by code. You move when the player clicks. You pee when your bladder meter is full. No freedom, just scripted behavior. But what if the simulation includes emergent intelligence, like AI in a sandbox, learning and adapting on its own? Then maybe you don't have traditional free will, but you do have autonomy, complexity, something like self-direction. It's not freedom from the system, but freedom within the system, which weirdly is not so different from how your brain works in physics-based reality. Are you an NPC or a player? Here's a fun or terrifying thought. If we're in a simulation, some beings might be fully simulated, like NPCs, while others are avatars controlled by real minds outside the system. That opens up a strange possibility. What if some people have free will and others don't? Maybe you're just running on local code, while someone else is getting input from a higher order mind, the cosmic equivalent of a gamer at a console. Is there a test for that? Could you tell? Spoiler, probably not. Because any behavior, even asking deep, philosophical questions, could be pre-programmed. That uncertainty echoes a very old idea, the problem of other minds. You can't even prove that other people are conscious, let alone who is controlling them. In a simulation, that question becomes even murkier. Glitches in the matrix. If we're simulated, are there any clues? Some physicists have speculated that physical reality might have a resolution limit, like pixels in a screen. The Planck length could be the smallest unit of space. Quantum randomness could be procedural generation. Others point to the fine-tuning problem. The physical constants of the universe seem suspiciously perfect for life, almost like they were set deliberately or chosen from a menu. Of course, none of this proves anything. But if reality is computable and minds are software, then free will becomes a software property, and that raises a wild question. Could free will be uploaded? Simulated minds, simulated freedom. Let's say we build a hyper-advanced simulation, a virtual world populated by is who think they're conscious. They believe in free will. They love, fear, and dream. Now imagine we ask them, do you have free will? They say yes, but we know how they work. We built their code. We can pause them, rewind them, edit them. They feel free, but they're not. Then we look in the mirror. Do we really think we're different? Maybe free will, like consciousness, is something that emerges when a system gets complex enough, a self-model within a model, a simulated story inside a simulated world. It might never be real in the ultimate sense, but it could still be real enough, one simulation to rule them all. Here's one last head-scrambling idea. What if the illusion of free will is the whole point of the simulation? Maybe the creator's aliens, posthumans, whoever wanted to observe what happens when complex beings believe they're free, even though they're not. Maybe it's an experiment, a story, a performance, and you are a character inside it. That doesn't make your life meaningless. Living without free will, so now what? Okay, deep breath. We've traveled through neuroscience, ancient philosophy, artificial intelligence, the justice system, the self, the simulation hypothesis, all orbiting one idea: you don't have free will, or if you do, it's not the kind you think, and yet life goes on. So now what? What does it actually mean to live in a world where you're not the author of your own mind, but still have to wake up, make choices, and be a human? Let's talk about how to function and maybe even flourish without free will. You're still the one living it. Let's get one thing clear. Even if you didn't choose your thoughts or desires or goals, you're still the one experiencing them. You didn't select your favorite song, but when it plays, you still feel the rush. You didn't craft your capacity for love, but when you hold someone's hand, it still matters. The lack of free will doesn't erase your life. It clarifies it. You're not in control, but you're still here, awake, aware, living out a story as vivid and strange and specific as any ever told. And that story still has weight, even if it's written by the universe. Redefining responsibility without free will. What happens to responsibility? It doesn't vanish, it evolves. You may not be responsible in the moral blame sense, but you're still part of the causal web. What you do affects others. Your words ripple through brains. Your actions shift lives. So instead of seeing yourself as a commander making noble or wicked decisions, see yourself as a node in the system, one that can nudge the network toward more kindness, more clarity, more beauty. It's not about deserving praise or blame. It's about shaping outcomes. Wherever you happen to be in the machine, responsibility becomes less about guilt and more about responsibility, the capacity to act skillfully when action arises. You don't choose your values, but you can live them. Here's a weird idea. You didn't choose to care about fairness, or art, or truth, or justice. Those values emerged in you, shaped by parents, books, brain chemistry, culture, but you still care deeply, so live them. Not because you freely chose them, but because they chose you. This is a kind of humility that doesn't weaken your integrity, it strengthens it. You're not a sovereign will imposing meaning on a cold world. You're a vessel for meaning. And that's beautiful. Habits without shame in the free will model. Bad habits are a failure of discipline, a sign that you're weak, lazy, flawed. In the no free will model, they're just loops in the system. You don't hate your thermostat for being stuck at the wrong temperature. You tweak the settings. You change the environment. Same with you. Change becomes a matter of engineering, not shame. You shift context. Reinforce new loops. Use compassion, not punishment. This isn't fatalism. It's the opposite. It's skillful hacking of the system you happen to be love. Without ownership, if our relationships can shift under this lens, you didn't choose who you fall for, who you're drawn to, who drives you nuts, but you can still show up for those people, not as a controller, but as a witness, a partner, a co-arising set of patterns in a shared human loop. Love becomes less about possession and more about resonance to systems syncing up, not by choice, but by chance and connection. And that might make it feel more sacred, not less. Because in a universe of blind forces, you found each other anyway. Meaning in the flow, you didn't choose your passions, but you can still follow them. You didn't invent your dreams, but you can still chase them in a deterministic world. Meaning isn't something you impose, it's something you discover. Not through control, through flow. You don't need free will to find beauty in a sunset, or meaning in a melody, or purpose in parenting. Those things happen in you, through you, and that's the point. The practice of letting go, living without free will, is not an idea. You just accept and move on from it. It's a practice, a daily loosening of the grip. When anger arises, pause. Remember, you didn't choose it, but you don't have to amplify it. When pride shows up, smile. But no, it's not yours alone. When shame creeps in, breathe. That mistake, it wasn't a failure of will, just a blip in the post-free will future. Let's imagine the world 100 years from now. Humanity has advanced. We've colonized parts of the solar system. AI is everywhere. Neural interfaces let us think with machines. The line between biology and technology has blurred, but something bigger has happened, too, as a species. We've accepted that free will doesn't exist. Not as a fringe theory, not just among philosophers, but as a foundational understanding woven into science, policy, culture, education. What kind of world does that create? Would we lose our spirit or discover a deeper kind of humanity? Let's play it out. Education. From discipline to designing the post-free will world. Schools look very different. No more shaming kids for laziness or punishing failure with moral judgment. Instead, education becomes system design, understanding how to create environments that support learning for every kind of brain. Students aren't blamed for struggling. Teachers aren't credited for being naturally gifted. Instead, success is seen as the emergent result of good inputs, nutrition, emotional safety, optimized tools, individualized pacing. The goal isn't to reward effort, it's to enable outcomes. We stop worshipping grit and start engineering better conditions. Justice, less retribution, more rehabilitation. Courts and prisons also evolve. In the old system, punishment was a form of moral correction. In the new one, justice is about risk, reduction, and repair. Criminals aren't seen as evil, they're seen as systems gone off spec. Mental illness, trauma, addiction, poverty, these are treated as causal chains, not excuses. Sentences are tailored for effectiveness, not for sending a message. Think therapy, education, social reintegration, not cold cells and long waits. And victims aren't ignored. Restorative justice becomes central, not because it's nice, but because it works. Healing matters. Closure matters. And when they work, those things ripple outward, reducing cycles of harm, work, and merit. Redefined meritocracy takes a hit. In a good way, we stop pretending that billionaires earned their wealth through grit alone. We stop treating poverty as personal failure. Instead, We recognize that everyone's station in life is a product of genetic lottery and environmental circumstance. That doesn't mean we stop striving. We still celebrate achievement, but we shift our praise towards systems that uplift, not just individuals who made it. We stop fetishizing self-made and start asking, how do we make better selves together? Relationships, more empathy, less ego. In a world without free will, relationships get better. Think about it. If you know your partner isn't freely choosing to be annoying, or forgetful, or emotionally distant, you soften. You stop assigning blame. You get curious. Instead of furious. It's not that people get a free pass. It's that you stop treating behavior like a moral referendum. You start treating it like a pattern to understand, and maybe even shift, together. Parenting changes too. Instead of molding a child into a good person through discipline, we focus on crafting the conditions for compassion, creativity, and emotional intelligence to emerge. Love becomes less about ownership and more about witnessing and supporting. Mental health, less shame, more precision. In the post-free will world, mental health loses its stigma. Depression isn't weakness. Anxiety isn't overreacting. Addiction isn't bad choices. These are recognized as malfunctions in complex systems to be studied, understood, and treated with precision. We invest in neuroscience, early interventions, community resilience. Not because we're soft, but because it works better than blame. People stop hiding their struggles, because struggling doesn't mean you're morally broken. It means you're human. Government and policy. Systemic thinking wins. Politics becomes less about ideology and more about data. We don't vote for leaders who feel strong or have values. We vote for those who understand systems, who use science to guide policy, not just slogans. We ask, what actually reduces crime, improves education, elevates health outcomes? Policies become experiments. We measure outcomes, adjust variables, test again. Like scientists, not storytellers. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what works in a causal web. But wait, what about meaning? Won't a post-free will world feel cold? Empty? Not necessarily. In this future, meaning is no longer tied to moral credit. It's found in connection, expression, experience. People don't have to deserve joy to feel it. Art doesn't have to come from struggle to matter. Love isn't a reward, it's a phenomenon. And that makes it even more miraculous. We stop asking, do I deserve this? And start asking, what can I make of this? Purpose becomes less about proving your worth, and more about participating fully in the ride, the human project. Rewritten, this isn't utopia. There are still problems, still conflict, still heartbreak. But the basic lens has changed. We see ourselves not as sovereign individuals waging moral wars against chaos, but as co-evolving systems, interconnected, shaped by causes, capable of shaping each other. The illusion of free will might never vanish entirely, but by the last question, let's rewind. You're standing in the grocery aisle, staring at 2 jars of peanut butter. You reach for the smooth one. Did you choose it? Now, after everything we've explored, you might say, no, not really. My brain made the decision before I was aware of it. My preferences were shaped by genetics, by culture, by every experience I've ever had. My choice was the end of a causal chain. I didn't start and don't control, and you'd be right. But that's not the end of the story, because you still reached. you still felt the preference, the smoothness, the pull. The decision played out. In you, through you. So now we arrive at the final, strange, beautiful question. If free will doesn't exist, what are you? You are the stream, not the stone maybe. You're not a decider. Maybe you're not a soul piloting a body, or a captain at the helm. Maybe you're more like a stream flowing from source to sea, shaped by terrain, weather, physics. You don't choose the path, but you are the path. You are the movement. Every thought, every action, every dream is just water flowing through a unique channel. There is no controller. There's only the happening, the witness within even if you're not in control. Even if the self is a fiction, there's still something else. Awareness, something is watching this unfold. Maybe not a soul, maybe not an entity, but a point of view, a lens, a flame in the darkness. And that awareness, that ability to experience anything at all, is the deepest mystery we know. You didn't choose it, you don't understand it, but it's there, right now. Noticing these words, feeling their weight, maybe. That is what you are, not a chooser, but a knower, not a will, but a witness. Stories within stories, here's another angle. You're a story being told by the universe, not a random story, a story full of twists, heartbreak, courage, absurdity. A story that laughs at itself, that weeps at the stars, that asks the biggest questions, even when it knows there are no final answers. You didn't write the story, but it's your story. It lives through your eyes, your voice, your memories, and, in that sense, it's realer than anything, because it's not out there, it's in here. We may be machines, but we're glorious ones even if we are deterministic systems. We are astonishing systems. We compose music, build cathedrals, discover galaxies. We fall in love. We risk everything. We imagine futures that don't yet exist. No rock does that. No tree, no algorithm. Even without free will, we are the most unexpected consequence of a silent universe. A ripple in space-time that knows it's rippling. A machine that dreams of freedom and dreams so hard that the illusion becomes a world. That's not a glitch, that's a miracle. The mystery remains in the end. We don't really know what free will is, or what consciousness is, or how experience arises from matter. We have theories, models, data, but the core is still wrapped in shadow. And maybe that's okay. Maybe mystery is the price of awareness. Maybe the moment we fully explain it all, it stops being life and starts being code. So we keep asking, keep wondering, keep reaching, not because we choose to, but because that's what minds like ours do. The last frame. So, the next time you catch yourself thinking, why did I do that? Or what should I choose? Pause, not to find the answer, but to marvel at the question. Because in a universe of entropy and stars, a tiny cluster of atoms is asking, what am I? And in asking, it becomes something more, not a god, not a ghost, but a story told once, just like this, and never again. Final question, if free will is an illusion, but the experience of life still unfolds, still aches, still matters, would you really want it any other way?